ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
As a 5-year-old, Ben Shewry's life was changed by a quince. It was an encounter that introduced Ben to the magic, the alchemy of cooking. And it was one of the milestones in the development of his obsession with food. Another was the way that his parents, uncles and aunties and neighbours would come together to share dishes and talk in the kitchen of his family's little farmhouse in New Zealand, teaching Ben that food and people and stories go together. Perhaps it was inevitable that Ben would become a chef, and nearly 10 years ago he became the owner of the Melbourne restaurant Attica. Under Ben's leadership, Attica has become known for its creative use of native Australian ingredients, from crocodile to ants, and a meticulous but inventive approach to food and hospitality that he likes to call ambitious dining rather than fine dining. And Ben maintains that his favourite food is the resolutely unfancy but always dependable hot chip. His new book is called Uses for Obsession, a chef's memoir. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Sarah.
This quince that changed your life, where had it come from?
Well, grew up in this very rundown farmhouse up this place called the Awakau Road in Awakino, Taranaki. And it was a winding gravel road through forest and through bush and through pasture. And as you came up the road towards the house, we were in a valley and there was a river jutting through the green pasture on either side. Things like beehives painted with different coloured house paint, leftovers from house painters. And it was in this old house where I was raised, and my parents lovingly sort of made it inhabitable. It had rat's nests hanging out of the ceiling when we moved in. Predating our arrival to the house was this gnarly old tortured tree which sort of towered over the house above the carport. I was a child that loved fruit, that just craved the instant gratification of sweet things, so I would clean out the whole orchard in my parents' garden. But the quince was this one tree that wouldn't bend to my will. You know, a raw quince is a granular, coarse, sour. It's an assault on a human in a lot of ways. It needs the magic of cooking. It needs that human interaction to render it delicious.
So you had tried to eat quinces raw, had you, and not been so impressed by what was on offer?
No, it spat it out. It was, and I'm coming from quite a low baseline here. I would eat the skin of the hairy kiwi fruit. I would eat the core of an apple, but not this fruit. No.
So what happened this morning in the kitchen with your mum?
Well, because it was such a cold place and things ripened slowly, Mum had a spot where she, on the windowsill, where she always ripened the fruit and anything like that, tomatoes. So she had a line of quinces in the sill in the sun. And one day we went into the kitchen together in the morning, and in the kitchen itself of the farmhouse was basically powered by an old coal range stove. The floor was very uneven. There was a wooden table in the middle of it, which is where we prepared and also ate. And so on this day, my mother taught me the magic of the quince. You know, we took the quinces, we peeled them. They quickly became brown and ugly like badly bruised spuds. And then this transformation took place as my mother taught me in her cast iron wedding pot that you can make them delicious through the magic of cooking by adding sugar and water and spices and cloves. But this, of course, takes many hours. I think it took about 6 hours. And at the end of the cooking process, the quinces were transformed. They were ruby, they were red, and we spooned them into bowls for my sisters Tess and Tammy and my father Rob, who always would have to have two.
It's a patriarch's right.
Absolutely. My father is a very hungry man. He's an insatiable appetite. Some cream, which run through that Picton rich syrup. And this was this moment at 5 years old where I learned that I could create special magic and joy for others from food. Mm. It was intoxicating because a transformation had taken place right before my eyes.
This farmhouse that you so beautifully describe in New Zealand, how did that part of the country make it to Hollywood?
Well, Jane Campion, who's just legend, had chosen our family farm as the site for her film The Piano. And this is after we've moved off the farm, but the bush scenes in The Piano, which are so emotive and dark and dank, and you can almost smell the place in those images. That'd been shot there in the bush, and this was the environment which we grew up on.
I remember a scene from that film, and I don't know if it's Sam Neill chasing Holly Hunter or who, but they're silhouetted going up this hill, and it's like a child's drawing of what a hill would look like, and it's up, down, up, down, up, down. What's it like to farm on that kind of country?
Oh, it's brutal. And I laugh that Australians would call those hills mountains because they were so steep. And there's just such a small amount of arable farmland at the bottom of them in the valleys. But yet my father would battle with those hills the entire time we lived there. Manuka, which is like a tea tree bush, tried to take over those hills. So my father was in this constant battle with nature, sort of trying to farm the land and trying to cut the scrub back. Just so hard.
And that native bush that was all around, were you allowed to roam out into that yourself?
We had incredible freedom. There's this memory, one of many memories, but there's one that sticks out with my sister Tess, my younger sister, and we hiked maybe 2 hours from the farmhouse. We had a packet of dried spaghetti in our backpacks, and we hiked up into the bush to where there was an old logger's hut, and the bush is pretty original in this area. There's moss, old man's beard hanging from the trees. It's very dark, so you're under the canopy of the trees most of the time, and there's this old, rundown, dilapidated hut right up the back of the farm. And in the hut is 2 single beds, rusty, no mattresses, with the wire springs sagging, which is where we slept.
And by yourselves?
By ourselves. We would have been 10 and 8, maybe younger. We tried to fish for an eel in the stream next to the hut, but the eel bit me on the heel. It's quite traumatic. I still just don't like eels to this day. We boiled our dinner of dried pasta on a fire, and this was just a very normal experience for us growing up. This connection to nature. It
feels an amazingly trusting thing from your parents to let you go and do. They must have trusted that you could handle yourselves in the bush.
We were up there by ourselves. There really wasn't many other humans around. We were in isolation, and they gave us immense leeway with that. There was some boundaries that we couldn't pass, I suppose. There were some guide rails, but generally we had this immense freedom until we made a mistake, and then we'd be told about it.
So beyond the quince, did most of your food that you ate as a family come from the farm?
Yes, it did. It all came from the farm. It came from the sheep and cattle that my parents farmed. It also came from things like wild goats and wild boars that my father would hunt on the farm. There were wild foods on the farm, berries and greens. In the stream, there was whitebait. There was an enormous vegetable garden that my mother tended to, which provided a lot. And then, of course, there were the black sand beaches of really rugged, vicious-looking places, jagged rocks, really boiling seas, and from that resource came fish and came kina, sea urchins, pawa, abalone, pippies, and crayfish, kura.
Tell me about going diving with your dad for pawa. What pawa? Am I saying that correctly?
Pawa.
Pawa. What are they?
So pawa is the Te Reo Maori word for abalone, giant sea snail. And they're indigenous to that coastline. And we grew up in this other place as well called Wharearino, which is even more remote than the farm. And at some point, somebody had carved this tunnel through a cliff face to allow stock to come onto the beach to be able to be loaded onto ships. So we had access to this very violent coastline. And this one day, my father, who loved to pass on intergenerational knowledge, took me to dive for them. And we hiked up the beach. The sand is coarse, black, and iron sand. And we walked past this rock, and my father said that's the site where 2 sets of fathers and sons have perished. Son went into the water, the father followed, they both drowned. And so this is a very, very dangerous place. And we're there at low tide to dive for the abalone, and my father teaches me how to do this. There's ways around to do it. You must only take the limit, which was 10, no more, just enough to eat. My father was always really steadfast about that. Understanding that when you take an animal's life, then that's giving you that energy and you've got to respect it and use every part of it.
So when you'd go into the water that day when you were fishing, collecting these together, what was it like under the ocean? Were they easy to spot? How do you retrieve them?
They're really hard to spot initially. There's kelp and sea lettuce and seaweed everywhere. The rocks are black and it's a reef, no sand. And you look down, at first you can't see them because they're dappled in colour. And it's sort of like a frequency illusion, though. Once you've seen one, then you start seeing hundreds, I guess. You need to take the right size, they need to be measured. And you've got to sneak up on them because once they know that you're there, they'll sort of prise themselves onto the rock and become very hard to get off.
And then once you'd collected them, how did your dad prepare them?
So he always carried around the back of the Holden Kingswood a metal sheet of metal, like a grill plate. And so he lit a fire on the beach from driftwood, heated up the plate. He took the shellfish, he shucked it out of its shell, and he took an old rugby sock that he had and he put it in the end of it and swung it, a bit like a cricket bat kind of, onto another rock to tenderise the abalone.
With just the right flavour of rugby sock in there as well.
Delicious. The scent of toe. And then he grilled it on the fire and sliced it. And, I mean, I have to be completely honest with you. I'm more like the ritual than the taste of it at that age. I've seen, of course, I came to love abalone. It's a delicacy.
But what an amazing way to prepare them together. So you mentioned, Ben, that your dad also hunted, animals on land. Did he do the butchering himself once he'd catch something? My
father, yes, was the official butcher of our farm, and his butchering skills, to put it kindly, were rudimentary at best. He, I witnessed him breaking down the animal and in a rough and kind of crude way, not with a lack of care for the husbandry of the animal initially, but when he broke it down, he would often miss things like arteries and he might slash open the stomach of the animal. And I mean, the smell of that is something I'll never forget, But it really did bring me closer to the food. But often Dad would serve this meat that he'd hunted or killed. And I remember he served me a steak once. I think I was 8 or 9. And he cooked it himself and very proudly put it on the plate. And I could see an artery in the steak, in the piece of meat. And it was like it was about to start spurting and pumping out blood or something. And it terrified me. And I think I didn't eat that kind of meat again until I started qualifying as a chef at about 18.
I was going to say that experience is either going to make you a chef or a vegan. I don't know if there's a middle ground after experiencing that. So your family were living in this isolated place, but who would come for meals? Who would you share food with in your little farmhouse?
People from the district, sometimes family. The closest neighbours were probably 15 minutes away. And we would have potluck dinners as a district. So maybe 5 or 6 or 10 families would come and everybody would bring a pot of food and put it on the main table. And it was so exciting to see what people brought. It's funny to say, though, my favourite would always be probably the food made by maybe the person with the least cooking experience, which was literally just a pot of boiled pasta. But it was an amazing sort of social experience for people that didn't have a lot of socialising growing up.
And what sort of stories would get told around that table?
Oh, they're most amazing stories. My family are come from a long line of storytellers, and often the stories are the way that people in the backcountry, farming people and people living in isolation, cope with what's happening to them. I write that out in the great nothingness, nobody's coming to save you, and so a way to make sense of this is to articulate it, and often in a heartbreaking but also funny way. Often the stories were, whoever against the man, often battles against the council or the authorities. And this was captivating to me as a child, and I just couldn't wait until I was old enough to be able to tell one of my own.
Was your interest in food noticeable to other people in your family, even at that kind of early age? Did it mark you?
It did, and it was. My mother recently told me that from the time that I was born, pretty much, I was obsessed with food, that I used to boil my dad's shoes on a pot on the floor that I would sit in my high chair and watch every mouthful of food that they would eat, that my first word was hot. And so I was completely obsessed by it as a tiny child. And she said it was so strange to have this obsessive little child. And it was like a child that had learnt a foreign language early. You know, it was just the way that I was.
Not all of your meals that you shared were delicious. I mean, your father seems to have a number of instances here, in addition to that steak, with the arteries still pumping. What would he feed you, Ben, when you were out working with him in the paddocks on your farm?
Well, there's these two memories that stick out really strongly. One was we were going to cut the scrub, which is incredibly physically hard labour, and my father is very strong. So we drove out to where the scrub was. We hiked up the hill, a very big hill. We spent 4 hours the first half of the day cutting the scrub, and I was helping him pull it away, and he was using the chainsaw. And then finally, I was starving, and lunch was going to come, and we were going to have lunch up there, and he pulls out his rucksack, and all he has is a loaf of bread and a brown onion.
It's the Abbott. It's the Tony Abbott meal. Yeah.
Oh, is it really?
He famously ate an onion in Tasmania on the campaign trail once. But
oh my God.
I digress. Yeah. So your dad has an onion and a loaf of bread.
Yes, he takes his pocket knife. He peels the onion. He cuts very thick slices of it and sandwiches these thick slices of raw onion between the bread. And I mean, I'm 8, and I know how wrong this is. I'm like, oh my God, Dad, you know, we're starving out here, and this is such hard work, and all we've got to eat is bread and onions.
Is that what he would have just grabbed as he was leaving the kitchen, or what was the thought process behind the onion?
I think I don't know, actually. I think he kind of loves food too. He eats so much of it, as I said earlier. I mean, another time we went over the back of the farm to fix a pump, and he took a week-old chicken carcass that had no flesh on it, you know, and a loaf of bread. So he has a history of doing this, my father.
So you'd have all these strong food experiences as a kid. Had you ever eaten in a restaurant with your family?
Seldom ever. No, I can remember going to Pizza Hut. I recall this was a special experience, and my memory of it is there's 5 of us, my 2 sisters and mum and dad, and they order one pizza. And I think that's probably all they could afford. So we eat this pizza, we have like 1 slice or 1.5 slices each. And that was really my only memory of restaurants, you know.
So why were you so keen to start working in them as still a young guy? You got how old were you when you first got your foot in the door of a restaurant?
Well, I was 10 years old when I decided that, you know, I've got to get some experience in a restaurant. I decided to become a chef at 5, not really knowing what a chef was. It was a different time. Chefs weren't famous. They weren't on television as much. So I wrote to 5 restaurants in the closest city to us, New Plymouth, and 4 of them never wrote back, and I never forgave them for it.
They're marked on your list of vendetta, yeah.
And 1 wrote back, The Mill. And that was amazing. They wrote back and they said, yes, I wrote.
You said, I'm 10, I want to come to you.
I'm 10 years old, I want to be a chef, I really want to come to your kitchen to do work experience. And they wrote back and said, sure, you can come on Friday and Saturdays. And so my parents drove me in on Friday and Saturdays, and I entered this absolutely, totally foreign world.
What sort of restaurant was The Mill?
The Mill was a combination restaurant. It had sort of a nightclub on the bottom floor. It had a restaurant of sorts on the middle floor, filled with antiques, and it was very eccentric, but it was very big and very busy for the time. And the kitchen was in the centre of the dining room, and it was as if they'd sort of built like a cowboy shack in the middle of the restaurant, you know, like this corrugated iron and horseshoes hanging on it. And inside that little square were probably 7 to 8 cooks, and they were dressed like pirates.
Like pirates?
Yes, they were. They were wearing bandanas.
What a concept.
And absolutely incredible.
And what did they make of you, this 10-year-old turning
They
up?
were so kind to me. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, thinking about it now. But they were so kind and so decent to me. The commercial kitchen is a dangerous place. It's busy and hot, and it's no place for a 10-year-old, but somehow they found it in their hearts to allow me to come. And it was great fun. They were in charge of this one little pocket of the universe. They were making food. That was bringing joy to people. They would play lots of games all the time. They were very jovial and jokey. They would put me in the dumbwaiter and send me down to the nightclub to scare the front of house staff as I jumped out of the lift.
Were you allowed to do any actual cooking as a 10-year-old?
I was. I was allowed, I remember raising and lowering the deep fryer basket for the fisherman's catch, which, really nothing was coming from the sea, to be honest, in that dish.
Did you get introduced to new flavours being in that environment?
Not so much in that environment because the food was so basic, but what I got introduced to was the camaraderie and the human spirit of the kitchen and chefs.
So, the fire was set alight in you, both this love of food and the excitement of the environments, the places that make food and sell it. But you're still only young, Were you doing home ec at school? Is that somewhere that you were furthering the skills as a cook?
No, I was training at home. I didn't do home economics because it was too basic. I was well past what they were teaching there. And I did home economics for 1 year of high school, and I had this brilliant teacher, Mrs. Marshall. She allowed me to not do the curriculum at all, to just do whatever I wanted. Whilst the other kids were making, milkshakes and toasted sandwiches, I was perfecting a dish, which is terrible, where all of the ingredients go in raw for a lasagna, and then you microwave it in the oven. I was decorating cakes. I was baking fruit cakes and decorating with royal icing. And she was just a tremendous person who was incredibly supportive of me and allowed me to sidestep the curriculum completely.
You then did go to a cooking school in New Zealand. What sort of place was it?
So I went to Waikato Polytech, and it was the best cooking school in the country at the time. I applied at 16, got accepted. It was a couple of years before I really should have been there. Went up and did an interview. I was so excited. And I remember the first day we were sitting in an auditorium, and there was sort of this good cop, bad cop mentality with these two chef tutors. One who was sort of saying, this is going to be the time of your life, and the other who was saying that we are murd, that we are nothing, that we are less than, we'll be very lucky if we even come out of this as cooks, let alone chefs. And it was a real baptism of fire.
And were they French tutors? It was that sort of French approach to fine dining?
They were French and Swiss and British, and that's all the same language, really. In terms of cooking, it's all the foundations of French cooking.
And do you still use any of those approaches or principles now?
In a way, it did inform me. It's good to have a deep base of historical knowledge of cooking, and all types of cooking, actually, to be a really well-rounded cook. So, yeah, that was helpful, but I quickly learned that wasn't really who I was. I couldn't relate to the vocabulary of French cuisine because it was something from a foreign land very far from here. Didn't speak to my New Zealandness.
Well, something that did speak to you, though again it's not a New Zealand thing. You visited a second-hand bookstore in Wellington and your life changed. How did your sense of cooking expand?
Well, I always wanted to be my own person as a cook, and I was really self-determined about that from an early age. So I was in this second-hand bookshop in Wellington called RTB's, and it's still there. It's a fabulous bookshop. And I was flipping through the cookbook section, and at that time, everybody was into this book from this very, very famous chef from America called Thomas Keller, and all the young chefs had this book. But when everybody sort of thinks the same, everybody cooks the same. So I was looking for something different, and I found this book called Classic Thai Cuisine by David Thompson.
And what was special about it? What was different about it?
Well, for a start, it was incredibly modest. It had no photos in it, and it sort of seemed to have this internal confidence, an aura almost to me. It was saying that I am a special document of previously hidden recipes and knowledge. And I just found it very appealing, and I became transfixed on it.
So you brought this book home, and then were you starting to try to cook those recipes?
Yeah, I cooked it from cover to cover. And the more I cooked it, the more excited I became by Thai cuisine.
Were there many Thai restaurants in Wellington?
Not so many, no. And to be honest, at this point, I'd become really obsessed with Thai cooking, but I hadn't really even met a Thai person before, which is so silly and hilarious.
Well, where did you go to have your first proper taste of Thai food?
Well, I thought that I needed to go to the source, to the author of the book. So David's restaurant was Sailor's Thai in Sydney. So in the year 2000, I planned a trip to go to Australia just to go to Sailor's Thai. And I went there. You know, I'd been cooking Thai food for probably 18 months, very rigorously at home by this point. So I thought I knew a thing or two. And I went to Sailor's Thai and I ordered everything on the menu, which I'm prone to do.
Everything?
Everything, pretty much. I mean, I could barely afford it, but I'm a glutton and I kind of want to taste a bit of everything on a menu. I get overexcited. I'm so enthusiastic about it. And it just smacked me in the chops with so much power because it was so ruthlessly beautiful, the meal. And I realised the distance between where I was as a cook and how far I'd need to go to actually have any sort of sense of mastery of it.
So, chasing that Thai cooking, you moved to Australia, to Melbourne, where you met this cook and cookbook author David Thompson himself at a cooking class. Where did you head next?
Well, after meeting him there, I asked him if I could come and do some work experience for him. He said, yes, you should come to London. So that's kind of where I went. He had a restaurant there at the time, Nam. It was becoming very famous.
Podcast, broadcast, and online. You're listening to Conversations with Sarah Kanowski. Find out more about the Conversations podcast. Just head to abc.net.au/conversations.
Ben, you were describing this sort of passion for Thai food took you, first of all, from New Zealand to Australia and then to London. What about Thailand? What was the first experience that you gave for your taste buds in the source of this cooking you'd fallen in love with, Thailand?
So I went to Bangkok and I was so blessed to stay with a Thai family, the Tang Phuoc family, and they had a fish farm. And so it was just amazing to be immersed into the culture of a real Thai life and to see the hardship and to see the beauty. I remember my first day there, they asked me to help the other young men harvest the fish, and we dragged this net through this pond. And as I was the tallest, I had to walk in the middle. And at first, as we dragged the net very slowly through the pond, I thought, there's no fish here. And then as we started to come across the pond about halfway, the fish started to jump out. And as we came to the end of the pond, there was so many that they were slapping me in the face and jumping back over the net. And we dragged the fish out and put them in the back of the trailer, and we took them to Talat Thai, the largest wholesale market in Thailand. And there the food was just incredible, you know. And for 15 cents, I brought a green curry of pea eggplants. It was redolent with spices and fragrant leaves and citrus, and the depth and the quality of it was mind-boggling. And it was a very important lesson to me because for 15 cents, I'd had pretty much the best meal of my life.
Western stomachs can come a cropper in Asia. Was that a problem for an adventurous eater like yourself?
Sarah, well, my favourite dish is mango and sticky rice, and my gracious hosts, unfortunately, the mangoes were out of season, and they'd tried really hard across a couple of weeks to find the dish, and then we were in Pattaya, and I had started to feel a little bit unwell from a meal that we'd had. And I went back to the house, and about 30 minutes later they arrived, and they were very, very excited. They'd finally found mango and sticky rice, and they knocked on my door, and the sort of, you know, the room has started to swirl around my head. And I open the door and I'm half crook, and I take the food and I smile and I have one mouthful and I run to the toilet. And I mean, I don't think I need to say anything else.
No,
but
the next 24, 48 hours of your life.
I thought I would die.
A miserable mess. Yeah, okay. But nonetheless, you were wanting to continue to pursue your love of Thai cooking. How did you do that in Melbourne? What sort of study did you set yourself?
It was really hard in Melbourne at that time. Sydney had the majority of the great Thai restaurants. And so I just took it upon myself to learn this cooking at home. And I set up a makeshift Thai kitchen in the apartment that I rented. I had wok burner out on my indoor courtyard balcony. I had a lineup of pestle and mortars in the kitchen. I had a coconut grinding stool that I would sit and watch television at. I just fully committed to it before and often after work, this rigorous sort of self-learning of Thai cooking.
You know, there are a lot of intense flavours and smells in Thai cooking. A shrimp paste, chilies. How did your neighbours react to your intense experimentation in Thai cooking?
I mean, I feel so sorry for my neighbours now. One thing I used to do is I used to heat the wok up and load it with dried chilies, and the fragrance and the aroma would be in the air. It would make people cough. I would make a curry and try to sort of placate them with a gift of curry. I'm really sorry. I mean, people were pretty cool, but I must have been a pretty insufferable neighbour.
After you joined Attica as a chef, your passion for Thai flavours and cooking kept evolving into your own distinctive style. And you say that you were learning to really listen to the ingredients, to pay attention to what they wanted to say. What did the potato start to say to you in 2009?
Well, the potato has always just been this accompaniment food. It's never really had its time in the sun. It's always been baked and stuffed and cheese chucked on it, or it's been the side to the steak, or it's been the chip. Every time, these things are delicious, but it never really truly had its own voice. And so I wanted to give it a platform to express itself in the best way possible. And so I went back to my earliest experiences of growing up in New Zealand with the culture of the Maori people and the earth oven that's such a central part to New Zealand food, the hangi. And I used this experience of making hangi in New Zealand as the foundation for the very first time, to say really what I wanted to say with food, which is that the best cooking that I could do is the cooking of the place at which I'm standing on. So I put all my hopes and dreams into this dish. It was a potato, it was cooked in the earth, it was grown, it was with smoky curd and other things that amplified the potato, but it was all about the potato. I put it on the menu, I was so excited, and I thought everybody's going to love this.
How did people react to your potato?
Well, it was mostly, where's the meat, mate? It was mostly that kind of attitude, and I'd like a side of steak with that. And I suppose this is kind of the first time in a serious restaurant where somebody had just put a potato as the protagonist on a menu. And so it wasn't met warmly, but I held my nerve because I believed in the dish, and that dish would go on to become our most successful, probably in our history, and it put us on the map globally. It was a life-changing creation.
What was the moment that you realised this was the dish, the way you wanted to serve it? That long lead time of sort of experimentation of something which a lot of us cook every day and don't really think much about cooking. What was the moment for you when you thought, this is the thing that I want to create with this? How did that arrive in you, in your taste buds or in your brain?
Well, experimentation is part of everyday life for us in the kitchen. And so we're just on a journey of trying and failing, and I felt like there was something there because it really tasted like the most potato-like potato I'd ever tasted. And there was this moment when the dish was complete, and it was just it was just the flavour of it. It was the culture, the flavour, the way it looked, and it was distinctive. I hadn't seen this before, and I thought, this is it. People are going to dig it,
And how long did it take before people came on board?
At least 6 months, probably longer, maybe even till today. In a lot of ways, it's long gone from the menu, but there was certainly a lot of pushback. But I guess from the people that came and really appreciated it, it was enough energy there in that exchange to carry it forward.
You had worked at Attica for 10 years or so, and then in 2015 became the owner. Is that a sort of logical progression for ambitious chefs to have their own restaurant?
No, it's very, very, very difficult for a chef working for somebody else to own their own restaurant.
Why is that?
Because we are in the service economy, we are some of the lower paid workers in society, we're not educated on how to run a business. In fact, we're actually told that that's not our place. And so when you kind of come up in that culture, that's what you tend to believe. So I had to overcome a lot to become the owner of Attica. It was challenging.
What stands out when you think back to those early months of you being the owner? Ben, what was that time like?
The thing that stands out is just telling myself over and over, I want to do this differently. This can't be the way it was. And you have an opportunity to change things, and it's on you.
And what did you want to be different about the restaurant?
I wanted it to be fairer. I wanted it to be more equitable. I wanted it to be more joyful. I wanted it to be kinder. I wanted it to be just to kind of be better in all ways. And one thing I really didn't want to do was to use the traditional restaurant business model to judge my own business. I wanted to look at other businesses that were excellent outside of the restaurant industry.
How much hard work or how long were the hours in that period at the restaurant for you?
At the age of 40, I worked out that I had already worked the retirement age hours of a 65-year-old. So the hours have always been extreme. And I had averaged 70, 75 hours a week my entire adult life.
Hospitality, is one of those professions that clearly asks so much of the people who work there. Just those hours, the pressures. It's marked by an enormous amount of burnout and, serious mental health consequences. Has that been a struggle for you? Has that been part of what working in hospitality has brought to you?
It has. I've had a hard time, like so many of us, and I've been bullied. I've suffered from depression at different moments. I have nearly given up several times. If it wasn't for my deep love of food and my ability to come back to that memory, of cooking the quince and reminding myself why I am here, I certainly would have left the industry. And unfortunately, we hear this so frequently and all too common. I meet people every day who have left, and sometimes they're wonderful people. And you think, my goodness, this has happened. This is happening to them. It's happening to us. It affects all of us. And so once I had an opportunity, I knew that I needed to be able to prove to myself first, actually, and to my team that it could be done a different way. And our employees work between 38 and 44 hours on a 4-day week. And at that time, when that happened, it had never really been accomplished in a fine dining restaurant before. But I thought that, that the buck stops with me. I want our people to live balanced lives, normal lives. I want them to be able to exercise at the gym and hold down relationships. And the way that the industry was destroying our people just wasn't okay. I couldn't continue to walk past it or be a part of that.
One of the things that's kept you working in food and restaurants is the connection you have with people, including the people that you get your ingredients from. Tell me about the mussel farmer who helped change the way you thought about your work and its role.
This mussel farmer's name's Lance Whiffen, and this comes at this very dark time in my life when, I was really, really struggling. I was disconnected from my young family. I had a breakdown in my relationship with the owner of the restaurant. I was in a tunnel of 100-hour weeks. This one morning, I'd organised to go to meet this mussel farmer with our fish supplier, and he was calling by to pick me up. And this morning, I just did not feel like getting out of bed. I was totally blue. And if it hadn't have been for Jason, the fish supplier coming by, who had given up time on his children's school holidays to pick me up, I would have cancelled. Instead, I went with him feeling awful, and we went to Port Arlington Harbour, and I met this mussel farmer, Lance Whiffen, and he took me out on his boat, and it was a complete stranger, and as we went out into the boat, Lance began to tell me in really simple terms of the hardships of his life. He'd talked about the effects of climate change on mussel spat populations and how he nearly lost the entire industry. He told me about how the first time round when he had children, he had worked so much that he'd missed their entire childhoods. And he turned to me and he said, I will never get that time back. And for me, in the place that I was, this was the first thing that cut through to me in many months. And I realised that it wasn't too late to change. It wasn't too late to change my life. I was heading in a bad direction, and I needed to do something. And it didn't happen overnight. It changed slowly. One by one, I began to analyse the things affecting me and put protections in place. And I would describe that time as if all of the clouds are dark and black, and it's always raining. And then suddenly there's just a little bit of light parting between those clouds, and it's hope. And as that happened, I sort of realised, hey, I think you can be okay, and I will never forget that experience and his kindness. He's still a friend to this day, and meeting him was life-changing. And so I think sometimes we hope for these extraordinary experiences, but most of the time they're just everyday experiences that can change us.
You know, you didn't go to eat in restaurants as a family, as a kid. It's not something that is necessary. Food is necessary, eating's necessary, but not eating out at a restaurant. What is at the heart of why we do that, of what's valuable about it?
Because we're humans, and we're looking for joy in our lives. And restaurants are the central place in society that creates such joy when we get it right. That ability to welcome somebody into the room with all of your heart and energy and treat them with the utmost care. And people come and they've had a variety of experiences in their day. Their boss might have yelled at them. They might be feeling a bit down. And the restaurant's role, at least our restaurant's role, is to turn that around and to say, I see you and I meet you on your own terms. And so for 4 hours or 3 hours or 2 hours, we have this moment with humans. And running a restaurant is such a human experience, and it's such an emotional experience. And to be able to engage with people in this way is truly life-changing for us. In a small way, that's what we're trying to get to with our customers. We're trying to connect to them. We're trying to treat them with more care than they've had the whole day.
One of the special things I always think is that it kind of invites you to behave a bit better too. You can sit at home and eat and, just every level, the way you talk to one another, the way you actually handle your cutlery, the way you treat the food, you can become kind of habitual and not take too much care. But eating in a restaurant reminds you to, step up a little bit as a human, to meet the food and meet the people you're dining with. And a good restaurant, I guess, holds that experience.
Well, I love that idea, that sort of sense of formality, but informal in Australia, because this is who we are. And in the restaurant, Sarah, we have celebrated the most incredible moments with humans across the 19 years, and several times we've been on people's bucket list. It's been their last meal. And with that has brought tremendous pressure and also incredible privilege that somebody, that's what they want to do. They want to come here. And here we are, we're so excited to look after them.
Do you have to be an extrovert to work in restaurants?
Well, I'm an introvert. And no, but I think you have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be an extrovert, but it really helps if you're a waiter, to be an extrovert. The kitchen is more the place for the introverts, because the waiters are the social face of the business of the restaurant, and they are fueled by the exchange between customers. And cooks, they can bury their head out the back and just grunt or nod,
So can that be a bit of a cultural divide in a restaurant between the extroverts out the front and the introverts buried away in the back?
There's an age-old dilemma in restaurants, and that is the war between the front of house and the kitchen.
Left brain, right brain, but in a restaurant world.
Absolutely. Almost like two different organisations in the same building, with very different jobs and very different roles, and as you point out, very different personality types.
How do you try to broach that then as the manager of both?
Well, I didn't initially at all, and so this war was sort of going on, and I was powerless to do anything about it. So I thought, what can I do? There must be a solution to this problem. So I had this idea. I called it staff speeches, and we would have a roster, and everybody in the business would be on the roster, and once a week, a different team member every week would have the floor in front of the whole team to give a speech. Now, the speech can be on anything that they like. There's no rules, and they have the team's complete focus, and it's their opportunity to articulate their hopes and dreams to their peers.
What sorts of things have people shared in those speeches?
Well, stories of intense hardship sometimes, like a family fleeing North Korea and in the process everybody being murdered except for the grandfather and surviving. Or somebody who shared with us for the very first time that they were bipolar. But also more simple moments like, I have a cat and I love my cat. Or I absolutely love the Richmond Football Club, which Matt, our head chef, has told us over and over and over again, along with footy sweepstakes, I should say. So they're always joyful, even when they're hard, but they don't have to be hard. They can be very funny. The point of it is to create a moment for empathy, because the problem with these two groups is that sometimes we don't have much interaction with each other, because somebody's out in the back of the building in the pastry kitchen and somebody's in the bar washing glasses. And often these people come into tension at a really crucial and stressful moment during service, and it's fiery. And so to undo that, this is where staff speeches came in. It was an opportunity for those people to see each other, to get to know each other, to care about each other. So when the pressure and the mistake happened again, and it will always happen, they're actually able to see the human rather than the anger.
As a Melbourne restaurateur, Ben, you went through COVID, and if we think about pressures that were on people and on restaurants, that's pretty hard to think of anything bigger than that. How did a packet that your mum brought home from the shops one day back in New Zealand in the late 1970s ultimately help you and Attica get through COVID?
My mother, Kay, is a consummate problem solver. And in the 1970s, she had this age-old problem, which was that the freezer had too much beef mince in it. And there's only so many interesting things to do with beef mince. So she went to the supermarket. She bought this very rare and exotic packet that she'd never seen before. It said lasagna pasta on it. She had no idea what it was. She brought it home for the family. She followed the instructions on the back of the packet, and she made a lasagna for the first time. Our family fell in love with it. And now this incredible thing, lasagna, life-changing thing, has spread through several generations of Shewrys.
Well, there's a dark secret about lasagna in New Zealand I was not aware of before your book. What is a lasagna topper?
Well, a lasagna topper is essentially a crumbed and deep-fried piece of lasagna. It's a New Zealand delicacy. I'm really being cheeky there. It's actually the great shame of the nation. It's found
Where do you acquire these things?
Well, that's a great question. You find it in pie warmers, and it's a real favourite of sort of school tuck shops and tradie hangouts, I would say.
So you were steeped as an individual and as a New Zealander in the glories of the lasagna. Whose idea was that you would sell takeaway lasagna to Melburnians during lockdown, which isn't an obvious thing for this innovative multi-course menu restaurant that Attica is known for?
Well, really the idea comes from my wife, Kylie. We had learned that we're going to be locked down for the first time. I was completely and utterly lost and despairing. It was my birthday. I thought I would lose the company that I'd taken so long to own. Kylie's saying we should do lasagna. I'm saying that's a ridiculous idea. I'm despairing. And because I had an amazing message from a friend, and also because of Kylie's just immense strength, she kept persisting, and eventually I agreed, all right, we'll give it a shot. And so we decided on the very first menu that people were really scared in our community. They were really worried. And the best thing that we could do is try to provide some comfort. And what comforts me more than anything else, more than any other food, is lasagna. And so we decided we'd make lasagna and we would deliver it to people.
How many lasagnas do you think you made during COVID?
Well, we ended up serving about 17,500 people out of this tiny little fine dining kitchen.
That's a lot of mince.
It was an insane amount of mince. I broke it all down. You know, we had this official title of the the Attica Bureau of Lasagna Statistics, where I broke down all of those details, and I made a T-shirt and made a very silly skit about it. But
Ben, earlier you mentioned that curry that you ate in Thailand that was, 15 cents or something, and it's one of the best meals you've ever had. So what do you say then, Ben, when people ask you why it costs so much to dine at Attica?
I would say to people that they can be rest assured that everything has been taken care of, that the staff are properly paid and cared for, that the suppliers are paid weekly and there's never outstanding bills, that the price paid for the food is accurate and proper, and that we engage with our community and the environment in a respectful way.
Your love of food and first experiences of food happened in the kitchen and I guess the farmlands of your family home. What's it like having your mum and dad come to Attica and cook for them?
Well, I think I feel the greatest pressure when they come, because even though they're my biggest fans, they have given so much of their life to my success, and they really, this immense childhood which wasn't about money. It was about love and nurture and caring and imagination. This childhood is the most precious thing, and I understand that now as an adult. It's the most precious thing that a child can ever receive. And they made many, many sacrifices for me and for my siblings. And so when they come, I feel this just sense of pressure, because I want to show them that I honoured that investment, that I respect them and I'm so grateful to them, and that all of that effort and all of that sacrifice wasn't a waste of time.
Ben Shewry, it has been so delightful to meet you and get a sense of the food journey that's brought you to where you are today. Thank you so much for being my guest on Conversations.
Thanks so much, Sarah. What an absolute pleasure.
Ben's book is called Uses for Obsession. This conversation was recorded on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and it was produced by Rebecca McLaren. I am Sarah Konoski. Thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Sarah Konoski. For more Conversations interviews, head to the website abc.net.au/conversations.